Testing, testing, 1, 2. Testing.
Yes, since we lost 3 of our colleagues.
Testing, 1, 2.
I feel that. I can hear you.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting of the Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on Wednesday, the 22nd of March, 2023. Before we move into the formal part of the agenda, I would like to pass over to the Deputy Chair, Shirley Boyd, an important matter.
Thank you, Chair. And I would just ask that the committee join me in a minute's silence for Ruth Perry, the Caversham teacher who took her own life, sadly, earlier this year, following an Ofsted report. A very, very sad situation. If you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, moving on to the agenda. Agenda item 58. Apologies, Lucian.
We have apologies from Father Richard Lamy and Sarah Clarkey.
Pauline?
I'll need to leave about 8:30, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 59, minutes of the previous meeting, the 31st of January 2023. I have two amendments from Sarah Clark, our Send Voices representative. These are on pages 12, and I will read out the amendment. It's at the bottom of page 12. The suggested amendment is Councillor Chadwick noted that there was a theme in the survey around difficulties in finding information. Sarah Clark stated that every local authority is supposed to have a website where parents could find information called the local offer. Wokingham does have a local offer, but families report finding it difficult to locate the information they need. The improvement of the website local offer is hopefully part of the improvement plan and is linked to the safety valve programme. The bottom of page 13, the last paragraph begins Councillor Boyd. And next to the letters SE19, it should be in the southeast rather than the southwest. Does everybody approve of those two changes? I believe also, Helen, you have a...
Thank you, Chair.
amendment.
Yes, under item 49 on page 9 of the minutes, David Goosey's name is incorrectly spelt. It's Goosey. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Helen. Okay. Are there any other amendments?
Amendment, just a matter arising.
Yes, matters arising. Yes.
Can you please put your mic on?
Sorry. Item number 51 on page 14. I asked for some information about the issues which have been identified in relation to training for drivers and escorts. I haven't received any information on that, so just to get it back up into the light, as it were.
Yes, thank you for that, Shirley. And I do apologise. This is something very important that we have overlooked. We were hoping to have an update from CTU in this evening's meeting. We were unable to arrange that. So when we discuss the forward programme, the proposal will be that goes into the June meeting, and that will be an opportunity to discuss that and a range of other related issues, including the training of the drivers and the escorts, the commissioning programme and so forth.
That's fine.
Thank you. There are a couple of other matters arising that I've identified. Okay. The Mayor's Office was to be requested to organise a regular slot for Youth Council annual report to be presented to Council. I think, Lucian, you have some feedback on that?
Yes, I have been in touch with the Mayor's Secretary and Priya, the Democratic Services Manager, and we believe that September Council would be the most appropriate time for them to present the report to full Council.
Thank you, Lucian. Anybody have any questions on that? Okay, and on page 17, there was a request that the education update that we considered in the previous meeting be circulated to all councillors. I'm afraid that that has not happened, and we will rectify that. Okay, so I do apologise for that. Does anybody have any other matters arising from the minutes of that meeting on the 31st of January? No, thank you. So item 60, any declarations of interest? Okay. Item 61, any questions from members of the public? Good. 62, any members' questions? Thank you. So item 63, Children's Services Performance Indicators.
Thank you, Chair. I know that we have Rachel Oakley with us online. I know we haven't received any specific questions in relation to this from any members in the room, although I am aware that Sarah Clark had sent some questions, although she's not with us this evening. So happy to take any questions from the committee, and I know Rachel will assist as needed, as will I, as will Ming, if there are any particular questions.
Thank you for that, Helen. We've not seen the questions from Sarah Clark, so what I would propose is that we get written answers to those questions and that they be circulated to all members of the committee. Is everybody in agreement with that approach? Okay. What I would like to propose then is that we take each of the dashboard items in turn now. So the first dashboard one, EHCPs. I did note, okay, that in the narrative that there is an expected significant improvement in Q4 as a result of some of the actions that have been undertaken and are described in the report. Does anybody have any questions which they would like to ask about dashboard item 1? Okay, thank you. Item 2, early help. Would anyone like to ask any questions about dashboard item 2? Thank you. Dashboard 3, children's social care front door. Dashboard 4, child protection. I do have a question, if I may. It's not specific to child protection, but I thought this was a good place or opportunity to raise it. We've talked many times during the past year and longer, about the increasing demand and complexity of many of the services and needs. My question is, and I think this is raised in the narrative around dashboard 4, is how much flex is available to meet these unexpected increases in demand and complexity? And in particular, are there any concerns that this might be could have an impact on the other services that are already being provided? Who would like to respond to that?
Chair, I'm wondering if you could repeat the first part of the question, please. I'm not sure I fully heard it. Apologies.
No, I do apologise. Yeah. It's an unfortunate habit that I have, not being clear and concise. So there's a reference, I believe, in the narrative relating to dashboard 4, about this common occurrence of increasing demand and complexity, of needs. Yeah, and there's some discussion about flex within the system to be able to cope with that. So the question is really, are there any concerns, about that flex? And could it be impacting at all on if resources, individuals are taken away from other matters, could it have any detrimental impact, on the other services that are being provided?
Okay, thank you. I don't know if Rachel wants to come in and add to this, but I'll start. We keep a very close watching brief on every, the situation in terms of the numbers of referrals, the extent of referrals, the challenge that we have across all of our teams. And there will be times when we do need to flex. We have times when we're affected by sickness, for example. And being a relatively compact local authority, the impact of staff sickness in Wokingham is felt. So we do have to be extraordinarily responsive, and we do on occasions have to increase our capacity through locum staff, for example, where we may have particular challenges. But just to assure the committee that we do keep a very close watching brief on capacity across the service. We do aim to be agile. And, I think you're absolutely right. We have seen rising demand and complexity, and that is reflected in the figures that you see in front of you. And clearly, I know we're not in a position to speak about the Ofsted inspection that we've had over the last few weeks, but our systems have been absolutely tested over the last few weeks.
Thank you, Helen. Are there any other officers who would like to add to that answer? I don't see any hands going up. Are there any members who would like to pursue that matter further? No? Thank you. So moving on, dashboard 5, children in care. Shirley?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just wondered on the in the little box with all the figures, the bottom one, children in care who have more than one allocated social worker in 12-month snapshot. And that does seem to be an increasing number of people, and I just of children, and I just wonder why that figure is gradually increasing in the way that it is. Is that to do with staff churn, or is there some other reason? Is there some reason why it's beneficial perhaps for children to have more than one social worker? I don't know.
Rachel, I don't know if you would like to come in on this, but I'll start. It may not necessarily be as bleak as it may appear. So if we have a child who's been working with us for a significant period of time, for example, there may be transitions that occur. I note the narrative in the actual report. It is referencing that the children in care who've had more than one allocated worker in the previous 12 months has increased. But it may be that we've, transferred within the service. There may have been some impact of around staff sickness, for example, or staff being on maternity leave or churn in other ways. Clearly, it's better for children to have, the same stability in their worker in terms of effective relationships. So we try to minimise wherever possible transitions, unless there's no other way, because clearly relationships are all working with children.
Would you like to ask a further question on that, Shirley?
I just because there obviously is an increase year on year here. Whether that is something that's being monitored, and perhaps there could be some answers provided, perhaps a little bit more detail for a future meeting.
We do closely monitor this indicator because it's a really important indicator for children. Yeah, but we do, like other local authorities across the southeast and the whole country, have challenges around recruitment and retention. Yeah.
I think that's a very important observation though, Shirley. And I noticed that the target, is 10%. Okay, so this is absolutely something that, I'm sure that Children's Services will be monitoring very carefully, and, we will also do so. So any other questions at all about dashboard item 5? Dashboard item 6, care leavers. Pauline?
Sorry, I just had a thought on children in care, if I may. I was going to ask, I mean, over the period of time, we found that it was very important to have consistency for the children. It affected the outcomes. And what was addressed by you and your predecessor was getting the employment situation so that we move from interims to permanents. But post-COVID, is there any danger of it moving, the barometer moving the other way? Because that were these numbers.
Just being frank with the committee, we have a very challenging situation nationally in terms of recruitment, retention of social workers, and it has been impacting in Wokingham as it has everywhere else. We are anticipating that the Department for Education will be assisting us in some guise in months to come around the very challenging situation that we have around agency staff and rates of pay, etc., that have an impact on permanence and stability within local authority workforce. So I think there'll be more to say on that in a future meeting. Rachel's hand is up. Yeah, do come in, Rachel.
You're on mute, Rachel.
Oh dear, I'm sorry, I'm trying to do everything at once. If reference to dashboard item 8, and not in any way to diminish what the director has said in relation to the South East and national kind of crisis around social work employment, but I think we have achieved a slowdown in the turnover of permanent qualified staff. So in Q3 we were down to 13.33%, which won't have impacted on the children's experience in the previous year, but it does indicate that I think, well, there definitely was a post-COVID move on of a lot of people. So we kept stability during COVID, and then when people were, I don't know, they were more able to go out, they started to make different plans and move. And I think we've seen it across the social workforce. Not just in Wokingham, but in other places as well.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Rachel. And does that help to answer your question?
No, thank you for that.
I would like to come back to this issue when we deal with dashboard 8, because I would like to make a proposal to the committee, on this. Okay. So thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Helen. Okay. Dashboard 6. The care leavers. I did want to make an observation. Sorry, Pauline?
Yeah, I've always had a particular concern about the welfare of youngsters leaving care, because they tend to be, they're not left afloat, but really they're having to cope on their own for the first time. So I've got 2 questions here. The first one is about the middle column. The percentage of care leavers 18 to 24 who are that's of the 99% in touch who are not in NEET. What are some of the reasons why they're not, who are NEET rather, and what are we doing to help them?
Okay, who can answer that question?
I'll come to my other question in a minute. So it's really, what's happening to them? Why are they?
Okay, Rachel.
I think there's probably 2 parts to this answer. We do have quite a number of young people in this cohort who have disabilities or illness that prevent them from being actively involved in education and employment. And there are a number, a small but definitely a number who are, say, living in hospitals or in mental health facilities. And we also have a number of young people who are parents who are not who are looking after their children at this time and are not looking to be in the world of work or employment. We are very, very mindful that entering the world of work and sustaining jobs is difficult for this group of young people. And I don't know whether, Helen, you'd like to respond to any initiatives that we've currently got in hand.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. Chair, are you okay if I do that? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes, we've had a paper at the corporate leadership team in the last few weeks, which has been around developing apprenticeships for care leavers within the council, but also working through the employment and skills group within Place and Growth to develop that offer beyond the council. And to offer guaranteed interviews for jobs within the council where a young person whose care experience meets the criteria. So I think an improved offer that we will be building upon in terms of the corporate parenting offer for young people.
Pauline, would you like to ask further question on this issue?
We're on the bottom column.
Okay, just before you do, could I add just one observation about care leavers who are NEET? And a little while ago now, I had the opportunity to sit in on one of the monthly NEET meetings. It's something which I would highly recommend, all members of this committee consider. These are monthly meetings in which each care leaver is discussed as an individual, and their individual action plans, are also discussed. And I certainly found that very interesting and reassuring. So, but you're absolutely right, Pauline, that we must keep doing as much as we can, to support these young care leavers. You had a second question or observation,
Yes,
Pauline.
it's on the bottom line about the 97% of the 99%. Where are the other 3%? What sort of accommodation are they in that it's regarded as unsuitable?
Rachel, is that likely to be you again?
Yes,
Or?
so there are, it's very neat this, because there are 100 care leavers. So you're right, that 97% means there are 3 young people who at this snapshot was taken who were not in suitable accommodation. Unsuitable accommodation includes young people who are detained at His Majesty's pleasure and, who are in prison. And it also includes those who are in houses of multiple occupation. So those that possibly have to share facilities such as bathrooms. So, and of course, it will include those that are deemed homeless and who temporarily homeless.
But
this 3%, with the exception of the person who's in prison, changes each month because we get some resolution and enable the young person to move on into something more suitable.
Chair, we're supposed to house the homeless, so I'm puzzled as to why any should be regarded as homeless, because we should have dealt with that. Any comment on that?
Well,
I'll just come in.
Yeah.
Sorry, Rachel, do you want to respond?
No, you carry on.
Okay. It may be that young people on a very temporary basis are in transition towards permanent accommodation. And they may have to be in something that we would regard as unsuitable for a very short period of time. But our ambition is absolutely spot on to have all young people in appropriate accommodation.
But if they're in transition, Chairman, they shouldn't be homeless. They should be somewhere. That really bothers me.
if I may say, at one of the snapshots, it includes a young person who had just finished a course. They were, say, in London and they wanted to live in Brighton, and they went to stay with friends. So they didn't have a permanent address, but actually for that young person, that was her moving to, you know, as any young adult, moving to something that she wanted to, you know, which was to secure a place for herself in Brighton where she wanted to work. So I'm not saying all of them at that as kind of proactive, but for her it was counted very temporarily that she wasn't in suitable accommodation.
Yeah, but homeless to me means they're out on the street. So how many are out on the street?
Okay, could I?
Because I really want to pursue this because it's
Okay.
bothering me.
No.
Okay. Pauline, if you could just turn your microphone off for the moment so that we can, not to silence you, you know, but I think there's a limit to the number of mics that can be on. Okay, so if we could just turn the microphone off for a second.
And also, why have we got anyone in HMOs? I was what?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think this might, sorry, Pauline, some of this is the classification of people, but young people who are on benefits are not entitled to accommodation that's anything more than a room in a shared house. Their benefits will not allow them until they're 35, and this is people under 25 and under. And I think none of them are homeless. Please don't think they're homeless. It's just that the classifications, we have to stick them in a particular box. So the one that's in prison is in prison. That's not deemed to be suitable accommodation, but actually there's nothing you can do about it. So it is, as Rachel referred to, it's not this, apart from that one, it's not the same people. They although the percentage is very similar, it's one or two people moving about at different times, and for a temporary period, one of them staying with their friends, or one of them, I think one went to France for a bit, and we couldn't, yes, yeah, it's all temporary moving about, and actually for them it may be suitable accommodation, it may meet their needs and so, but it's just not being able to classify like that. But we are actually, these figures are pretty good compared to national things, and we, as you can see, we're in touch with 99% of them, so that's actually pretty good going.
Yeah, but it's absolutely right, you know, to raise this issue because, you know, we are concerned, of course, with the welfare of these young people.
I wouldn't like to suggest it's not right to raise it. It's absolutely right.
No, but what I would like to suggest, you know, is that even though it's not three young people, you know, in total, in that quarter, you said that there are some who are moving in and out. They're still relatively small numbers. So what I would like to suggest that wherever possible, you know, that we get a little bit of narrative, you know, about what is known, you know, about those young people who are not or have not been in suitable accommodation. We may not be able to get information on each of them, but at least whatever information is available, I think that would help to it would help to reassure us. Would anybody
be happy with that, Chair?
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for raising
just
it.
one young person.
Absolutely.
For accommodation.
Yes.
One
Yeah.
too many.
And from an officer perspective, is that okay? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Pauline. Did you have anything else on dashboard 6? Okay,
Can I
Shirley.
just ask a quick question, Chair? And you, Rachel mentioned that one of these young people is in prison. And do we keep in touch with that person in prison? Do we visit the person in prison?
Yes, just to assure the committee that we do. The young person is serving a very long custodial sentence. So, yeah, we will be absolutely in touch. Yeah, keeping in touch.
And presumably, will that stop when that young person reaches the age of 25, or how does that work? You know, is there a precedent for this?
The young person is only 18 at the moment, so we've got a number of years to work that one through. Obviously, working closely with the probation service because they will have responsibilities when that young person becomes older and is released from custody finally. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is a very significant custodial sentence that's being served.
Yeah, well, that's a tragedy. Thank you for that.
Okay, moving on, dashboard item 7. The figure that stood out for me was the 9 permanent exclusions in Q3. And I don't see any narrative at all about that. I don't know if there is any information available for tonight. Dashboard item 7, the bottom line, number of permanent exclusions.
I suggest we provide a written response, Chair, if we're unable to cover it. I'm not seeing any hands up on the screen.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
thank you. Okay. Anything else on dashboard item 7? Okay. I think also on dashboard item 7, do we receive data on children in care who are missing from home or care for our children who are placed outside of the borough, outside of our borough? Or does this data only include children who are placed within the borough?
Don't know whether Rachel wishes to come on, but I'll just open this up by saying any child who is in our care who's placed outside of the borough, we would be keeping a very close watching brief and would be routinely looking at information about any child going missing or returning late, because that's our responsibility to do so, and return home interviews should be conducted. Maybe by mobile phone, it may be by a different range of guises, but I don't know, Rachel, if you want to add any more to that. Thank you.
Rachel, you're on mute, I'm afraid.
Sorry. Yeah, this is the way that this information is presented, and as Helen said, we are as focused on young people who are away from the borough going missing as we are on those who are living within the borough.
Good, perfect, thank you. Any other questions on dashboard 7? Dashboard item 8, Children's Services Workforce. Now, this matter was raised a little earlier this evening, and I note that in the narrative that we now have an officer whose primary focus is on recruitment and retention. And I'm just wondering whether members think it might be useful, helpful, to invite a report either from that individual or someone else to report on how this new initiative is working. My own view would be if it was felt appropriate and if the officer was comfortable that it might be particularly useful if they could appear with the committee, to answer questions, share thoughts, experience, and so forth in person. I don't know, Helen, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yes, Chair, I think that's entirely appropriate, and we'd be happy to arrange that. And I'm sure the individual concerned, Alex, would be very pleased to come in front of the committee. Yeah, so happy with that suggestion.
Okay, are all the members of the committee happy to request that? And I would like to propose that we aim for the June at the June meeting. Thank you very much. Further question?
Just one small question. Thank you. In the narrative here, over the past 6 months, we have successfully recruited 10 new ASYE, and I just wonder what ASYE is for.
I think Rachel should answer this one because Rachel has been instrumental and her colleagues, her staff within this. Rachel, over to you. Thank you.
It means assessed and supported year in employment. So after social workers have completed their social work qualification, they take up employment in a borough and have a supported year. So they each have a practice consultant allocated to them who supports them make that transition from academia to practice. So they start off with fewer allocated cases, and over the year they build up to the same number that permanent social workers, longer standing social workers have, and their complexity increases. But while they're doing that, they have additional oversight. And we have found for many years that this is our best pipeline for getting social workers. And many of our social workers, senior social workers and assistant team managers came off the ASYE programme that Wokingham runs.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting. So it's like a kind of mentoring system.
It's a mentoring, coaching, supporting system. And we've recently, we're registered with Skills for Care, who oversee the programmes and give us a small amount of money as well per candidate. But yes, I think it has been enormously successful, and there is a great deal of competition at that level. So each year we probably get 40 to 60 people applying to come on our scheme.
Brilliant. It's really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for raising that, Shirley, and for your explanation, Rachel. I think that when we speak with the recruitment and retention officer in June, this will be a good opportunity to perhaps get a little bit more detail, about this ASYE programme. So thank you for raising that. Okay, so that's the agenda item on KPIs. Okay, the next agenda item, 64, is the update from the executive member for Children's Services. So over to you, Prue.
Thank you, Chair. It's going to be a short update because most of the things I was going to talk about will be covered by later addenda items on the. So the first thing is the safety valve agreement. We have a safety valve agreement. It's going to be an interesting few years, I think, if you could say, implementing everything that we need to do. We've got to completely redo all our SEND offer, essentially. And in return, the DfE are going to give us, over the course of the next few years, £20 million, with 8 million of that coming this month. It's you will know that we have an accumulated deficit in the high needs block, and the first tranche of money will almost halve that deficit. So the deficit is something over 16.5 million, and we're getting 8 million to contribute towards that. And you will be having more information about that later in this meeting. We've also been successful in getting both the SEND schools that we bid for in the summer, which is wonderful news. It did slightly surprise us that we got both of them. There's only 33 schools and only 3 authorities got 2. The other one was East Cheshire, I remember. Birmingham. East Cheshire is in a very similar position to us, although a bit bigger, in that when Cheshire was created as unitary authorities and split, East Cheshire ended up with no SEND provision in their half of the county. We really need to get going on both projects. We're still waiting to hear from the DfE on the exact timelines and proposals and so on, but work has already started. It does take several years to design and build a school and get it open, so it's not an immediate panacea for all our SEND sufficiency, but it will in the end benefit everybody. And the other thing is that we've had the Ofsted inspection of Children's Services, which is completely embargoed until the 9th of May. so we are unable to discuss it with you. But I do want to thank all the staff for everything they have endured over the past few weeks. It's very grueling for them. The forensic nature of it, the intensive nature of it, and the uncertainty, the pressure on top of trying to do their day job at the same time. We really appreciate everything they've done. And the final thing, I suppose, is that you may or may not know that work starts next Monday on converting Farley Hill, the old Farley Hill site, to an outreach site for Addington, which is initially going to have 14 children from September. Is that the right number? I think rising eventually to about 40. Residents were invited to a meeting yesterday to discuss the building project, but work starts on that on Monday, and that's a really exciting project. It's great for Addington. We're really grateful to them for taking it on, and we're really looking forward to it opening in September. So apart from thanking all the staff for everything they've done over the past few months, getting safety valve over the line, getting the bids over the line, having the inspection, and still carrying on with everything else that they have to do. That's it, really. That's my update. I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, shall we take the questions in the order in which Prue raised them? Yeah, so anything on the safety valve first? Graham?
Actually, my comment is all at once. No, just to having been involved previously, I would also like to commend the staff for their work in getting the proposals for the schools through, for safety valve, and what they've had to go through with the recent Ofsted, and I've witnessed a couple of those. So it really is a very commendable effort by the officers.
Yeah, thank you for that, Graham. And I'm absolutely certain, that everybody here tonight, all the members tonight, would echo most strongly, those sentiments. But I would actually go a little bit further, or be a little bit more explicit. So, for example, with the safety valve, my understanding is that it's besides children's services, that quite a number of other departments, officers within the council were heavily involved. Is that correct? And that we, if so, that we would wish to extend our thanks to them as well.
Okay. Yes, there were. I mean, it became a corporate response because of the size of the financial implications. And the risk to the council if we couldn't get things sorted. So the chief executive, Graham Ebers, has also been involved. Various people from all departments, more or less. The core children's services team have been beavering away. You'll hear from Jonathan a bit later on, and more of the detail when he does his presentation on the SEND stuff later on. But it has been a humongous effort to get it over the line. There were times when we thought it wouldn't happen.
Yes, a number of people who've been involved are on the call tonight. I'd like to highlight also working with school leaders, working through our commissioning colleagues. A huge partnership effort, and Send Voices were clearly working with us throughout as well. So, a huge team effort.
There is one person, apart from you, Helen, who really needs to be thanked, and that's Lynn Samuels in the Children's Services Finance role, who I don't know how she does it. She's been a miracle worker, really.
Totally agree. Yes, Lynn should absolutely be commended.
Yeah. So, Lucienne, if that officer's name could be explicitly sort of recorded in the minutes. And our thanks to everybody who's on the call tonight, who's been involved in whatever capacities, and of course to everybody else, who's not here with us tonight, because as Prue and Helen said, it has been a corporate effort and partnership. I would like, are there any questions at all about the two new SEND schools? I do have one question, if I may. Has there been any other? Is there any initial thoughts or more developed thoughts, about what sort of provision there might be in each of those schools?
Jonathan has a presentation for you later on, which goes through that.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay. Right. Shirley?
Just a question. I wondered if you could enlarge slightly on the outreach at Farley Hill, perhaps what age groups that's going to be, or what type of setup it's going.
I'm going to have a stab, and Helen can nudge me if I get it wrong.
Or we can bring Jonathan in,
Oh,
or
we
Ming as well, because they're both on the call. Yeah.
Yes. Oh,
Or Hayley's.
Hayley, Hayley, why don't you lead on that? You're on mute, Hayley.
Sorry, can you see me? I can't see anybody. Yes. So
Yes.
Jonathan may correct me in some of my in my commentary, but for Farley Hill, so it's an expansion. It's 40 places. So as Helen said earlier, we're expecting around 14 to be in place by this September. The age group is early years, reception year 1, year 2, I think is what we're looking at the moment. So yeah. So as Prue said earlier, the work starts on Monday, so very positive.
Shirley?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. That's useful. Thank you.
Okay, so if there are no more questions or comments at all about the executive members update, we move on to agenda item 65, care leavers CAMS provision update.
That's me.
Hayley, is that?
Yes, it's me.
Is that you? Thank you.
Yes. So for those of you who don't know, so I'm Hayley. I work in children's commissioning, and I've written the report around the new children in care CAMS service, which we have recently commissioned. So in the report, I've given some outline details about the service that we've commissioned, but just in summary, really. So this was a service. So back in 2020-21, we identified that our children in care required a more specialist and immediate response to mental health needs. So the ICB and the 3 local authorities in Berkshire West, so that's Reading, West Berkshire and Wokingham, decided that they wanted to jointly commission a children in care CAMS service. And so over the last kind of 18 months, we've been working together to mobilise that service, design the service specification, look at the contract details, what it is that we actually needed to deliver. And as a result of that, the service started mobilising middle of last year. The recruitment started. And we're almost at capacity within the full staff team. But the actual official launch for the service actually is in April, so that's next month, and we're hoping to have an almost full complement of staff within the team. But as the service has been mobilising over the last few months, that service has already been starting to work with our children in care and making sure that they have access to mental health support. So the actual service itself is made up of various components, but overall we have a consultation element to the service, which is about providing that initial response to social workers, to our teachers, to our foster carers, to look at what is the right thing for that child, what would be the best support for that child, and it will be different for every single child. We then, depending on what the needs of that individual is, we would have some therapeutic interventions, some direct work. But one of the biggest, I guess, successes that we hope will come out of this service is that it really provides that team around the child to make sure that we can work together amongst different agencies, because we know that quite often our children in care do have a lot of people involved in their lives and their care, to ensure that they get the quickest and the support that they need to enable them to kind of develop and grow into their adulthood, really. So a big success for Wokingham, I think, in terms of getting this service off the ground. I'm very happy to go into more detail of the service if people want me to, but I've outlined in the report around the aims of the service, the objectives.
Okay. Hayley, if I could just interrupt, okay?
Yes, sure.
Yes, of course.
this afternoon I had a meeting with Helen Medway, I think she's called, one of the team leaders of Berkshire West in the NHS, as a looked after children's nurse. And she was absolutely singing the praises of this service, even though it's not fully mobilised and it's only had a soft start and all that. She said it's already making a tremendous difference. They've really noticed that it's had an impact, and they're really, really pleased to see it.
Good. Thank you, Prue. Hayley, can I just confirm, you did mention that there was a report, okay? I'm not sure that members of the committee, if there is a report, I'm not sure that members of the committee have received it.
It was circulated. I don't know if you remember, I sent a link because it was received one day after the publication of the agenda, so I emailed everybody separately.
Okay, so we'll take a look at that, but just be aware that we haven't, that most of us haven't actually seen it this evening. There is also, there was also at the Corporate Parenting Board a report produced by, I think it was Berkshire West NHS, which set out in absolutely fascinating detail the model that's used, bespoke model, that is being used for our children in care and the CAMS provision, and setting out some of the differences, between the approach, the service that's available to those children and to other children, taking into account their very specific needs. And I think it would be really good for all members to see that report as well. I do have one question, though, if I may, and that is that the agenda item is titled Care Leavers CAM Provision. My understanding was that is it children in care CAMS provision, or is it only care leavers?
Yes, I think that was a mistake in the title, Andrew. But actually, whilst you brought that up, there's actually a pilot that's underway at the moment with the ICB around commissioning a specific care leavers mental health service. So we are working with the ICB to get some more information about what that looks like. But there is an intention from the ICB to commission a bespoke service for care leavers around their mental health support. So it doesn't just stop when they're 18, yes.
Do any other members have questions on this agenda item? Okay. It's really good to hear that positive feedback from Prue, following her meeting this afternoon. This is, of course, an item that we are going to wish to continue to monitor very, very closely, going forward. And, we're looking forward to continued progress. Thank you very much, Hayley.
Okay, thank you.
Item 66, the Fostering Transformation update. Okay, is that Nathan?
Hi. Hello, Chair. It's Nathan Whitley here. I'm a placements consultant, and I can take you through some of the highlights with the report that hopefully has been shared with the committee.
Yes, it has. Yeah.
That's great. So it'd be fair to say that there's a national and regional picture that's very similar for the local authorities, our neighbours, and the breadth of the country. There's a shortage of residential and fostering placements for children at the same time as we're seeing a rise in number of children in care. And on that basis, the Fostering Transformation Steering Group was set up to ensure that we are kind of future-proof, looking at the next 3 years. And I'm the consultant that's come in, and I've got experience within fostering, adoption, and residential as a head of service, and I'm leading on this project alongside Hayley and Adam. The last year for fostering has been fairly successful, I would say, but there's more we can do. Over the last 12 months, we've had 50 children were placed into fostering, and half of those children did end up in-house fostering, which I think is a great success. The other half were placed with independent fostering agencies. But unfortunately, regionally, there aren't enough of independent fostering agencies either. So we can't fall back on that, as like many local authorities can. So there's a great need to grow our fostering service. In my opinion, We have a small but a very close knit fostering service that has delivered over the last year in most circumstances. There's one area though that we've been struggling, like most local authorities, is the placements of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. Of the 25 children that were placed with independent fostering agencies, nearly all of them were unaccompanied asylum-seeking children between the ages of 15 and 17. And most of them went to London. So as part of this, and as part of this fostering transformation program, we've been started to work with communities to try and build off our in-house fostering service to better service and look after those children locally. So that's one of the highlights of the report that hopefully committee members have seen, and we've got some plans around that. As I say, in-house fostering has been fairly successful. We've got 12 young adults who have stayed with carers and are currently living with carers, which I think, when we heard earlier about care leavers, I think it's great to see that as a fostering service, our carers are able to support that. And as a local authority, you do support care leavers very well in terms of fostering arrangements and foster carers. In terms of meeting the future growth demands, I've been consulting with all members of the service and with many foster carers. We have regular fortnightly meetings to go through what they feel would be best to grow the service, because ultimately, if we haven't got happy foster carers who are saying to their friends, their community, people they see in the schools and at work, that they should be foster carers, then we're not going to grow the service. So that's been quite successful. And as part of that, we're bringing foster carers to the fore. We're bringing them within meetings as much as possible. And I know they play a part in a number of children's services meetings, but I think we could do more of that. And that's as part of the summary, I think we need, that's one of my suggestions, bringing carers to the fore, because they know about fostering as much as anyone else does. So as part of the work with the recruitment campaign, foster carers now are buddying with applicants. Not newly approved carers but applicants as well. So we're bringing people who are interested into fostering into close proximity with our carers, and that's already paying dividends. We've got a recruitment target of 10 carers for the next financial year. We missed that target this year, but I think with some intense direct marketing, I think we could definitely achieve that this year and grow on that 20-25% per year. So just to summarize, some of the things that have been identified and the fostering transformation program is project managing is a greater focus on the foster care recruitment and the utilization as well of those carers, and preparing those carers so when they come through and they are supported to become and retain their foster caring status, because it's a real struggle in that first year. We need to ensure that we've got competitive fees, allowances and benefits, especially in the world we're in right now with inflation, etc. And I think Wokingham do really well with that. So that's a bonus. And we also need to prepare and support carers to meet the needs of more children. We're working with workforce development in terms of making sure, in terms of all the training meets needs as well. Working alongside CAMS and the Compass team to make sure all of our carers have all the training and the resilient support that they need to do what is such a demanding task at times. And as I've already mentioned, UASK, and we're going to have a dedicated UASK recruitment strategy. And also, we're going to have a new website. We saw that today about how it might look, and we've got a really modern, fresh look. And we're going to revise our marketing so it can be more targeted. And that website is a strong start to that. But where we are different to independent fostering agencies are the fact is the children are living with us. So actually, there's something about doing family finding as early as possible within the recruitment process, because that's our advantage. So it's difficult, but with more focus on recruitment and bringing carers to the fore and having really good news stories and footage on the website, etc., talking about case studies, I think we've got a good opportunity to grow the service as long as I say, we have that focus and that project management support.
Good, thank you, Nathan. Questions from members? Graham?
Thank you for that report, Nathan, and I'm delighted to hear that there's a lot in that report to be celebrated. On what is a very difficult subject. But I have a question, which is about the unaccompanied asylum seekers and the cohort that you named. Tell me if I misheard, because I might well have done, is 15 to 17-year-olds. And I would have thought, as a layman, that they're one of the most difficult cohorts to manage. Now, I'm sure that there are other authorities that would be facing similar challenges. And I wonder if there is something that we can do in common with other authorities to address the problems for this very challenged group of people. I've overused the word challenged, but you know what I mean.
I think that's a very good point. It's difficult to in a small, compact local authority. It's very difficult to have the resources to meet the needs of a diverse community. So I do think that's potentially, yes, there could be something in that, in terms of maybe doing something with neighbouring boroughs as well, to have this kind of a shared approach. I think that's very valid. Yes.
Graham, if I could add, I think that's a really, really important point. And I noted in the report that almost all of our UASCs are placed in London boroughs, and that only 17% of them are living in-house foster carers. So many of them are presumably, in semi-independent and similar, accommodation. And given the vulnerability, that many of them must experience, this must be, a cause for concern. Now, I noted that you said that that you're hoping to develop a foster carer, UASC foster carer recruitment program. It's following on from Graham's point. Is there any best practice yet, that is becoming apparent about how this might be approached? Or is there any indication of willingness, as I think you were suggesting earlier, perhaps cooperation, between various local authorities on what must be an incredibly complex issue?
Yes, well, the majority of our children will come from with a Muslim background. So there is Friday fostering program currently that's being run through mosques, and we have dialed into that. And I went to the Woos Hill Islamic Center, for instance, to start these sorts of discussions. So there are a lot of the advice is about really getting into the communities and working closely with them to kind of find a way that some of them could become foster carers, because it's not an easy process. And some of our communities that might be first generation communities will struggle to work with local authorities and social services, etc. So I think a lot of direct work will need to be done with our groups. But I think there's some opportunities there. And I know that Reading have done community events as well through mosques. And I think that's probably a way through. I must say that actually some of the decisions that have been made to place children in London are really culturally appropriate. And it means, and this is the juxtaposition we have really. Ideally, we keep children local so we can give them all the local services and all the real benefits for being a woking citizen growing through. But of course, people want to be with people like themselves, and being in London in a very diverse communities is an attraction as well. So actually, I think it was exactly the right thing to do, whilst we build something more local. And we might find that we have a position where we're doing both, because I think that's probably advisable for some young people.
Shirley?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was going to ask you if you were doing any outreach work with mosques, and I have a very large mosque in my ward, the Aisha Mosque, and they're very keen on community, reaching out to the community and so on. So it certainly might be worth your while making contact with them and seeing what could be done locally. In the area. In my ward is quite a diverse ward. You know, we have a mosque and we have a gurdwara in the ward, and a lot of people particularly from the Pakistani community in the ward. So maybe useful bit of intelligence for you there.
Excellent, thank you.
Morag?
Well, thank you. It was just a thought. Given the ages of the young people concerned, is there a risk that perhaps we don't have a lot of time to develop a good relationship with them? How could you address that further?
I think you're right, but we'll have a responsibility for these young people up to 25. So this is the start of us helping to look after them at that point. So I think building local resources, and we've got a really good opportunity, and I'm stepping over into probably someone else's territory here, but of building our semi-independent provision and our supported lodgings provision. We've got a better opportunity of building that locally, because it's more bricks and mortar and staff rather than foster carers. So if we can bridge that gap, if we can start growing our fostering services, we can build community hubs, etc., and the information we need to support young people going through to 25. Hayley.
Thank you. Can I just,
Of course.
More of a comment, really, if you don't mind. Is there a sort of optimism that youngsters who have perhaps enjoyed the London life might feel it a little bit, what's the right word? Hesitate to say boring, but I'm thinking of my own children here. Once they've gone to London, they really don't want to come back to Wokingham, in the nicest way.
I think that's exactly that is most definitely a problem, and that's why as I say, we need to grow the fostering service so we can bridge that gap, because I'm confident we can build care leaver opportunities for them, because there's so many opportunities in living in this local authority.
Nathan, I note under the completed milestones that you talk about the action plan being developed or has been developed. Presumably, some of the things which you've described about the UASCs is in the action plan. I'm wondering if it would be possible for all members to cite a copy of the laytest iteration of the action plan. And I hope it's not stepping on anybody's toes, but I think it would also be useful for corporate parenting board members, to cite that as well, so that we can be kept up to date, but also feed in some of our thoughts and observations and so forth as future iterations are developed. So, for example, you mentioned at semi-independent living, which is something which we have talked about many times, before, and which we may well wish to express a view on in relation to UASCs and others. So.
Yeah, I think I'd welcome that, because it is going to take. I think it is going to take the whole local authority to support this.
Thank you for that. Does anybody else have any questions at all about that?
I think Hayley was.
Oh, sorry, Hayley. Sorry.
Thank you. I was just going to build on what Nathan was saying in terms of the semi-independent provision, and obviously looking at, what care leaving opportunities in terms of housing and accommodation we can offer. And it was just really to let you know that we are looking to establish a US steering group specifically to look at a range of issues around the support, what enhanced support packages we need to look at. We need to look at housing and accommodation as well as foster care. So I think it's a bigger issue than, obviously Nathan's got one part of that, but I think it's Children's Services are looking at that specific steering group to look at all of that range, a range of things to build that kind of the appropriate support and community for those unaccompanied asylum seeking children, and as they transition to become adults as well.
Thank you for that, Hayley. Any other questions or comments at all? If not, thank you very much, Nathan, for a report and for all the work that you and your team are doing. It's much appreciated. Thank you. If we can move on to agenda item 67, the SEND strategy refresh. And that is Jonathan. Good evening.
Evening, Chair. I've got a presentation actually, so I'll share my screen if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So I'm covering some of the same ground as Councillor Bray has already covered, but I'm going to go into slightly more detail on some aspects of it. We've broadened the scope somewhat beyond just the SEND strategy itself, but mainly because it covers so many. There's so much activity in this arena at the moment. We felt it was important to cover a range of different, we broadened the scope to include a lot of the different developments that have been happening in the last few weeks. So we're taking a broader look at the special educational needs and disabilities as a whole system. So I'll look at an overview of the safety valve programme, what's actually been agreed with the DfE, just I'll summarise that and what the implications of that will be or begin to look like. I'll go through the free school proposal, the two free school bids that have been approved. Obviously, Councillor Bray's covered that to some extent, but I can say a little more about what those schools will provide. There's a high needs capital bid that I think is quite pertinent. We're waiting to hear the outcome of, and I want to cover that so people are aware of broader proposals for expansion of SEND provision. Then I'll cover the strategy refresh and why we're doing that now and the sort of timescale and scope for that. And I'll very briefly touch on the governance of all of this because there's so much activity at the moment. So I'll go at some speed because there's got a lot to cover, and I appreciate you've got a busy agenda, but I'll take questions at the end. So the safety valve programme itself, the agreement that's just been reached with the DfE will requires us and enables us to implement a new special needs support service, which will help schools with earlier intervention, and to refresh our own outreach offer. So there's an outreach offer for schools again to help them with those getting in earlier and intervening to help the children with needs at an earlier stage. We'll be implementing our early years strategy around SEND. That's been formulated, but it again needs to start motoring along now in terms of delivery. Again, around largely focused on early intervention and earlier help. We are going to redesign and improve our SEND local offer, setting out what's available locally. Very much doing that in partnership with SEND Voices, our local parent carer forum. We have major issues, we feel, around the reliability of data, in that we have data held in different systems within the authority, and actually triangulating that is quite a labour-intensive and time-consuming process. So we are looking at putting in measures to improve our data recording and how we can access and use that for management information. It's very hard to make management decisions when you're spending so much time reconciling different data sets. We in particular look at the local special schools, the new special school capacity, which will help us making less use of independent and non-maintained special school provision, which is the largest driver of the current overuse of that independent sector, which comes at a great cost and is often out of area. Our commissioning team will be, there's investment going into the commissioning team, Hayley's team, again, particularly with a focus on that independent non-maintained sector, so we can improve the quality assurance and contract monitoring around that provision, which we make great use of. And much as we want to reduce that use, we need to ensure what we're getting is good value for money. And again, focusing particularly on preparation for adulthood and our post-16 offer. I think because we don't have any FE provision locally, there are some gaps in that arena, and we again want to take some steps to improve that. The overall impact of the safety valve programme, if you take the projections, if things were to continue in the current sort of trends, by 2028 to 29, with the measures we're intending to take, we'll be spending £56 million less by 28-29 than we would otherwise have done. So we have the risk of a huge deficit budget if we don't take these measures. Now, I'm not going to go through this slide in great detail, but this sort of sets out broadly the pillars for that, how we're going to go about doing that. So that's about meeting need at the earliest opportunity, intervening earlier, significant savings attached to that early intervention agenda. Improving specialist capacity, as that's investment in the schools and the other provision, which I'll detail in a moment. Again, that's probably the single largest saving attached to that, around £28.3 million attached to that over the next few years. cost-effective and value-for-money provision. That's around our commissioning and our increasing and improving the contracting with that independent sector I've mentioned, and our SEND systems and operational improvements. Again, there are lower amounts attached to those latter two themes, but they're very important because they underpin the ability to deliver the first two. So there's a huge level of interdependency between these different approaches. So it needs to happen. All of these aspects need to happen to enable that whole system benefit and whole system shift and change. Sorry, I'm struggling to move on. There we go. So even with the safety valve being fully effective, we're still likely to have a cumulative deficit of 41 million by 28 to 29. That's being funded. Effectively, what safety valve does is it unlocks investment from the DFE, Department for Education, to pay off part of that deficit. But unusually, the council is also will be paying off the other half. In effect, around £20.9 million of that deficit will be funded through the council's own contributions. That's an unusually high contribution. I think there's a recognition we're in quite unusual circumstances compared to some of the other areas in safety valve. There will also, in addition to that, be around over £7 million investment in invest to save opportunities and implementation costs of this enormously complex and ambitious programme. So as you can see, it's a major transformation piece of work. I'll take questions on that if you want to ask them later, but I'll carry on going because all of these aspects all relate, all interdependent, as I've said. So the free school bids, I think Prue's already covered this very well, which is that we were enormously surprised to land both those bids. We only received confirmation a few weeks ago. Only 33 schools awarded nationally, and we got 2 of those. It's also interesting to note 2 of our neighbouring areas have also been awarded new special schools. So there'll be a kind of whole area benefit in terms of that sort of sub-regional benefit, and we'll see probably less reliance on our provision from some of our neighbours as they start developing their own schools. And again, the major thrust of this new provision will enable us to make less use of the independent specialist provision. That's probably the main financial benefit. Of course, there are huge benefits to families in terms of having provision closer to home, part of their local community, and enabling them to build those social networks, which are so important to young people as they're growing up. So Free School 1 is perhaps the higher priority. We had to prioritise between the two. This is the one we saw as the main priority. So this is one we had hoped to land. Will support around just under 100 places for pupils with social, emotional, and mental health difficulties who could not have their needs met in mainstream schools. There's significant growth. There has been significant growth in this arena, as you've been hearing in other parts of the agenda. And we see projections of that continuing to increase over the next few years. Even with Oak Tree School, you'll be familiar, Oak Tree School is opening for pupils with autism in September 2023, and there's a level of overlap between those two categories of need. But even with that school opening, which will be a 150 place school, of which we'll access roughly half, that we will still need more provision going forward. So there's no hesitation that we know we can need this. The proposed location for this is Rook's Nest Farm, which needs to be approved again by executive have approved us nominating that site, but that needs to be approved again before we proceed. Free School 2. This is more what you describe as a broad spectrum school for pupils with cognitive disabilities. So this is more like an Addington style school, like the school we already have. Even with the expansion of Addington proposed, and even with the Farley Hill development, we still see soaring demand for that type of provision. So we are again confident that we'll need this. But by the time this school opens, we'll have Addington will not be able to.
I don't think we've got the next slide. So. Sorry.
Has it not moved on? Can you see slide Free School 2?
Not yet. So.
Oh, it's strange. It's showing on my screen.
Perfect. Thank you.
Has it appeared?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
So this is for pupils with severe learning disabilities, profound and multiple learning disabilities, and they're likely to have physical impairments too. So this will need to be a more highly spec'd school in terms of the physical needs of the school. As I said, even with Addington expansion, we'll undoubtedly need this provision going forward. The proposed location for this school is at Grays Farm, but there are demands on the space there in terms of the leisure facilities that are required for the local community, and we're having to we're awaiting to see whether there'll be sufficient space left on that site. We need to move at speed, but we are also considering other options and other possibilities should it turn out that that site's not quite large enough for the school. The final site will in any case need to come back to executive for approval. That I won't dwell on that. The DfE timetable, if you have, I mean, I can send these slides out afterwards, but there's a very, very highly pacey timetable for development. The DfE have already fallen behind their own timetable, I should say, but undoubtedly in the next few weeks we'll begin to see us have to move at some pace to keep up with the DfE expectations. In terms of the next steps for us, I mean, there's a huge amount of activity and energy going into this, as you might imagine at the moment. We've the timeline, as you see, is we have to move at some speed. We've already this week launched a public consultation. This is to prepare the ground for the free schools. We didn't want to wait for PERDA because it could have led to delays. Due to the pace of development, we wanted to get that public consultation launched now on the broad principles of the need for these different categories of provision we're planning on opening. So that launched this week, and we've already started receiving some response to that. The project team's being established, as you'd expect. Site selection I've covered really. We may have, in previous rounds of free school development, the councils have had the option to lead the capital process. I think our preference would be that we do lead that process, because there were some difficulties arising in Oak Tree where the DfE led the capital development, but it remains to be seen whether they're going to offer that in this round of free school development. There'll be some financial implications for us as a council, because the funding will not cover all the implications. For example, some of our net zero commitments might not be fully funded by DfE levels of funding, and we have to fund things like the access roads and any abnormals. So there will be a level of cost associated with these two schools. We'll be involved in the private provider selection process. We're being very proactive in reaching out to suitable trusts we think we'd like to see applying. But ultimately it'll be a DfE decision. We will inform that and be involved alongside the DfE, but ultimately the DfE make that final decision as to who operates these two schools. In terms of the capital bid, I'll just touch on this quickly. We have submitted a bid alongside our safety valve bid. We've submitted a bid for capital funding of 6.3 million. We're yet to hear the outcome of that bid. We're expecting that certainly by the end of March. I'm confident we'll hear by the end of March, although we haven't got an actual date for confirmation from the DfE. This will cover the development of more resource spaces and SEND units attached to mainstream schools and led by mainstream schools. It's a key pillar of our approach around safety valve, of keeping more children in mainstream and closer to mainstream, closer to home. That's in 2 phases. And the second aspect of that will be two post-16 provisions offering a total of 45 places within the area for pupils with EHC plans, students, I should say, with EHC plans. As I say, we haven't had confirmation of that funding yet, but we're hopeful. We've landed the two aspects so far have been positive, so we're hoping we can land this one as well. And we'll let you know, obviously, as soon as we do. The strategy refresh. I mean, frankly, the current SEND strategy is isn't due to expire until 2024, but events have overrun and overtaken it. Obviously, the safety valve programme. We've had the launch of a new SEND inspection framework this year, which has had some significant changes to how local authorities and areas are inspected. And the government have just recently launched their SEND and Alternative Provision Improvement Plan, which again has some very substantial proposals within it and significant changes. So we really feel the need to update and refresh our SEND strategy. It's also worth noting that because of the pace of safety valve development, we have to some degree left our partners standing. We haven't really had the time to do proper co-production and engagement. And I think we need to almost reform those bonds and ensure that our partners are alongside us again in terms of the SEND strategy more broadly, in terms of how we're going to tackle the challenges in the coming years. So we've got the proposal, the plan is over the next few months to do some significant in-depth co-production engagement work with parents and carers, with schools and with health partners and social care partners too. That will take a number of months in parallel with implementing the safety valve programme, but we would hope to have the strategy ready for consultation in the autumn of this year, ready for a formal launch into the spring next year. But that will be a major piece of work over the coming months. In terms of governance, this may not be something you want to dwell on now, it's late in the evening, but broadly speaking, we're drawing on the existing SEND Innovation Improvement Partnership, which has multi-agency involvement. We want to evolve that and develop that, but it has to bear in mind and take into account some of the profound changes that are coming through, including safety valve. So there'll be a single programme board that'll report through to the partnership board. That'll sort of cover the actual activity around safety valve. As you can imagine, there are lots and lots of work streams that are actively getting going at the moment. We're currently configuring this governance arrangement, and obviously reports into things like the Children's Overview and Scrutiny will become a regular fixture. You'll be hearing more about this in the coming months and years. It's a 6-year programme, so there's lots of ground to cover. And unless there's any questions on the governance, we're still in discussion with some of our partners. So this is still a work in progress, you might say, but we are putting the programme together with some speed so we can get cracking on delivering the programme. I won't dwell on that now because I think that probably, if there are questions, feel free to ask them. So I hope that wasn't too fast, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Just before we come to you, Pauline, I think it would be grand if we could get copies or get copies of the slides for our reference. Okay, but Pauline.
Thank you very much. I've actually got 3 questions, I'm afraid, Chairman. First 2 quite quick. Which of the other 2 neighbouring authorities that have received funding?
Oh, you've caught me on the hop. I know one of them is Bracknell Forest. I believe
Windsor and Maidenhead. I think it's Windsor and Maidenhead.
Windsor, yes, Royal Borough, the Royal Borough.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
The Royal Borough. Sorry.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Just wondered whether we might be able to use some of their places, but I expect they've got the same problem as us. The second question: what other options are you considering to Grace Farm? You said you were considering other options.
Bearing in mind, we've only just had the announcement. We're working very closely with colleagues in property services. So I know there are a number of other sites that may be being considered, but I'm not close to the detail, I'm afraid. The project team hasn't yet had its first meeting. They'll be meeting next week. So I can report back in due course, but just at the moment, I'm afraid I couldn't list them. We're assured there are a number of other options.
It would be useful to know which they are, if we could perhaps send an email around. The third question is something I'm particularly concerned about, and I know other members are as well. Are you checking that these new school buildings will have fire sprinklers fitted in them? 2 or 3 years ago, some of us members and the officers fought the DFE very, very hard to get funding included for this in the new school in Winnersh. And after a huge struggle by our officers that went on for a long, long time, the DFE gave way and provided money for fire sprinklers. It's more important than ever in schools like this that they have those. And there is therefore a precedent. So the DFE has got no excuse for not including it this time. So can you reassure us that you will make sure that fire sprinklers go into these new buildings?
And I think Prue has something to say on this as well, Jonathan. So
shall I go first, Jonathan? So yes, they will have sprinklers, but the DFE will not provide them. It's not in their spec. So therefore, we will have to pay for those. So as Jonathan had on his slide, sorry, Pauline, that is the factor, because we have to pay for things like the access road, any abnormal things to do with the site. So, for example, if there was contamination on the site, that would fall to us to pay for. The sprinklers will be provided.
That's true.
No, I'm afraid it is true, Pauline.
We discussed this on Monday with Bernie Pitch, because he was the one who actually got funding from the DFE.
No,
okay, let's follow this up outside the meeting.
I know he did. I can tell you categorically.
In this.
No, we discussed this on Monday, and at the Strategic Growth and Assets Board, and it was made very plain the DFE will not be paying for sprinklers, but we will be paying for. They will have sprinklers. We are not. We are not going to
differently prove, because I was very involved.
That we will have sprinklers. Do not panic that we will not have sprinklers. No, it's our council policy to provide them, and we will be providing them.
That's good. Okay, thank you. Other questions, Pauline? No. Any other members have questions? Okay. As you said, Jonathan, you certainly are moving at speed, and on many different fronts. So I can see that this is going to become sort of a standing item, and again one which we're going to continue to take great interest in. I think also, as as more of the documentation and so forth is developed, this would be another opportunity for Overview and Scrutiny Committee to have input, into the development, of future iterations. I think we would very, very much like, the opportunity to do that, and I hope that, that officers, would consider that, to be appropriate.
Yes, just to respond briefly, Chair. Yes, we would absolutely welcome that. We note this evening we don't have Sarah Clark with us. Her input as amongst many other partners will be critical. So we'd welcome the opportunity to come back.
Indeed. Morag?
Well, thank you, Chair. You've just covered the point I was going to ask. Thanks.
Right. I was also really pleased, Jonathan, to hear, that you acknowledged that given the frenetic pace, at which things have been happening, recently, co-production, has slipped a little, but that it's very, very much, still on your agenda, and quite rightly so. I was very pleased, to see the launch of the public consultation, this week, for instance, and I hope that will be very widely publicised. That you get lots and lots of input. I don't have any other specific questions. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add?
I just absolutely endorse that we could get a copy of that presentation, please, because it gives the framework on which we'll have future discussions, and that we make this a recurring item.
Absolutely, yeah. Sorry, Ming?
Chair, I just would like to add internal consultation. We do not just publish on the council's website. We also conduct community group, including Same Voice, asking to send out to as many parents as possible to reach out more relevant resident of the council as much as we can. So we want to make it a meaningful consultation as much as we can.
Absolutely. This does actually raise one other question in my mind. I think that we would all agree that we have benefited enormously, from the presence of Sarah Clark, Send Voices, as a member of this committee. I'm wondering if anybody, has any suggestions for other stakeholders, who might contribute and for whom it would be appropriate to join this committee. I'm sure that, that could be given very careful consideration. So, Prue?
I think a member of the Youth Council might be very useful to have on.
Sorry, a member of the
Youth Council.
Sorry, Chair. Are you bringing this up under this item, or are you bringing that up in general? I'm just trying to understand.
I was bringing it up under this item in response to Ming's comment, about trying to get more community engagement, in this process. So, okay,
so what you're actually proposing is that we expand this committee with other stakeholders. It's not a Send issue specifically.
Oh, yeah, absolutely right. Well spotted. Yeah, well spotted. So we have had one suggestion, which I think we should mull over. Okay, and at any time, if anybody has any other suggestions, I'm sure that we would give them very, very careful consideration. But thank you very much, Jonathan, for all the work that you and your team have done. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Okay, so agenda item 68 is the forward programme. Now, we've already had one suggestion this evening for the next meeting, which will be the 20th of June, and that is for the CTU driver training and commissioning agenda item. And I think we would like somebody from CTU to actually be present that evening. I don't know whether some form of formal report or verbal report would be most appropriate.
Chair, we can seek a view. It would be Rebecca Brooks, I would imagine, from CTU, who would come along. CTU sits within the Place and Growth Directorate. Zoe, I'm aware you're on the call. Is there anything I'm missing? Thank you. Sorry to bring you in like that.
No, that's fine. No, it would be Rebecca Brooks. She manages, oversees all the commissioning and driver training, so that's the most appropriate person. Yeah.
That's excellent, and we can decide close to the time whether a written or verbal report is most appropriate. I was very interested this evening to hear about the US steering group. I think it would be good at the appropriate time for this committee to hear from that steering group. Yep.
Chair, could I make a suggestion? We've actually been working on a draft strategy for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children and young people, which cuts right across the whole education, emotional well-being, health, and other aspects. I'm wondering whether it would be useful to bring the draft strategy into this meeting as part of a wider conversation, and the steering group would fit under that banner.
I see a number of people nodding. Okay, well, and
I'm sure we could bring it in June if the agenda isn't overloaded. We did some significant work on it in the last few weeks, so we can certainly refine and bring back in June.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. Is everybody happy with that?
Yeah,
Graham?
second that.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any other items for the forward programme?
Chair, could I just pick up earlier in the meeting, we spoke about the recruitment and retention challenge. I think we could certainly provide a report. I note earlier in the meeting, we also spoke about the ASYE programme, and we have some phenomenally bright and capable individuals who are on that programme. I'm wondering whether the committee would like to actually hear direct from some of our ASYEs as to how they've found their experience of training and development and, practicing in Wokingham.
Apologies, I do remember, of course, now that we did raise this earlier, and I think it's an excellent suggestion. If it's possible to do this in June, if it's the programme is going to be too crowded, I see Shirley is expressing some concerns. Maybe Shirley and I and Lucienne, we can sit down together and see whether June or I think the following
June or September, either would be fine. Thank you.
Would people be happy with that?
The new meeting's on the 20th of June. It's almost Midsummer's Day, so there's plenty of time.
The reason I was looking slightly askance at that is the post-Ofsted update and action plan, which I feel is going to be a fairly lengthy item and a lot of discussion, and we want to do the other things justice. That's all.
I think you're absolutely right. But let's put our heads together with Helen also, and we'll see what is going to be most practical. Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for that. We're now moving on to agenda item 69, exclusion of the public. And I'm required to read out the following statement, that under section 100A, bracket 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act as amended as appropriate. Lucienne, can you confirm when the live streaming ends?